Hello people, and welcome to Crypto Exposed. Finance expert Bet David mentions XRP as possible Swift replacement. Okay guys, let's get into it. Okay, so the person here, Bet David, is actually Patrick Bet David, someone who you guys are probably familiar with, and this isn't the first time that he's brought up XRP in regards to Swift and the whole replacement thing. There was a video in, was it this year or last year? I want to say it was last year, but it wasn't that long ago, and he was starting to talk about XRP. And one of the things that I will say in regards to it is, you know, like, when we listened to the video, you could tell he wasn't fully clued up on XRP. This was more of a thing of like it being kind of given some cliff notes about XRP, some bullet points, and he was able to like get his point across, but you could tell there were certain things that he didn't quite understand. And so we've got here him having a podcast with someone, and they're basically talking about how, you know, Swift could be replaced. Now, the first thing I will say in regards to this is that I do question if this podcast came out before Swift's announcement about building a blockchain, because that would, you know, I'm wondering if that would have changed their perception here. But let's just generally get into this then. So what's been said here is that they're basically talking about how, you know, Swift basically is old and outdated, and, you know, over time you do generally get, you know, things being replaced. Okay, look, this is the thing that I'll say to you guys. What you've got to understand is what Swift is. Swift is a conglomerate of like 11,000 plus banks, right? And it's all these banks working together. So Swift isn't kind of like, it's not just like owned by one particular bank or whatever. It's like, it's a group of banks all working together. They've all kind of got a mutual understanding, let's say. And so you got to understand that when it comes to like Ripple coming in, and let me just kind of caveat this. When I'm answering this, I'm talking about XRP replacing Swift. I'm not talking about XRP being an alternative to Swift, because there is a difference. I do not believe XRP will replace Swift. I do think it can be an alternative to Swift, but not replace it, right? So the thing that I'll say, just getting back to my original point, is that these banks are not going to want to let Ripple have so much control over the banking industry. They're just not going to want to give them that kind of power. So I do not see them allowing Ripple and XRP to just replace Swift. I just don't see that happening. Now, could it be a thing where it can get a percentage of their market share? Yeah, I think that's possible. But do I think they could just completely come out and replace Swift? No, I don't see that, because this is managed by a group of banks. You know, like this is a thing where these all banks are all coming together with this common understanding, and they're all together in this. Swift is the dominant, you know, force here. Ripple's the outsider coming in, like trying to just get a little piece of the pie, basically, right? And so I don't think they're going to let Ripple come in, let them get hugely successful, and then let them have a monopoly on the market, right? I just don't see that happening. And so, look, for me, I just don't see that happening. I just cannot see a world where Ripple just completely takes Swift and Swift just goes, you know, into the darkness and just evaporates. Like, I don't see that happening, right? Like, I just can't see that being a thing. In terms of the technology, well, yeah, let's get into that then, because I think this is something that we need to also discuss. Yes, Swift's tech is outdated, but we know now that they're building their own blockchain. And so this means that from here on, they will obviously have the technology to compete. So they're just upgrading, which isn't surprising at all. You know, like at the end of the day, they haven't chosen Ripple or XRP for this. Again, I'm not really surprised by that, because Ripple was saying that they want to compete with them. So at the end of the day, I'm not surprised that they didn't choose to work with Ripple or XRP for that reason. And so, yeah, they've basically gone with Chainlink, and they're going to build a layer 2 blockchain via Ethereum on the Ethereum network. And so, you know, this is the thing again, like one of the things that's mentioned here is how, well, you know, with Swift, it can only do settlement. And that's one of the things that I've been seeing a lot of people say now in regards to why they're not concerned with Swift going with Ethereum, because they only do messaging, they don't do settlement. The whole point of them building a blockchain is so they can now do settlement. I think this is the thing. People are talking like, oh, you know, Swift can only do messaging. Like, they couldn't possibly get over to doing settlement. Well, no, like, if you now put a blockchain in place and they now can create their own blockchain, they can now do settlement as well. Like, this was actually said in the announcement. They said they're partnering with Chainlink to do tokenized settlement. So this is where, again, like, people need to understand what's really going on here. Like, look, Swift are going to be able to do settlement off of the back of this. It isn't them just doing messaging anymore, because they've got blockchain technology. So yes, they can do it fast and they can do it cheap. So I hate to burst people's bubbles, but yes, they are still going to be able to compete with Ripple and XRP. They can now do settlement based on the blockchain technology. That is going to happen. And so this is why I'm saying to you guys, XRP isn't going to replace Swift. Look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not going to replace Swift, but it could take some of its market share. That is still a feasible option, right? Like, XRP could still be an alternative. So this is the way I look at it, right? I've tried to explain this before, but think about it like this. Think about clothes. Think about all the big clothing brands you've got. So think about like Armani, Gucci, Prada, Nike, Adidas, right? Think of all these brands. They all make clothes, right? There's not really a clear victor in those brands, right? There's not one where you say, well, this is the best of the best, right? It kind of comes down to what your preference is. So some people might like Prada, some people might prefer Gucci, right? Like, it's just different preferences of what people want to wear. Now, there are obviously some brands that are more expensive than others, obviously, but they all do what they do and they all do it well, right? You can buy some Nike trainers, they're good. You can buy some Adidas trainers, they're good. So you can buy whatever and they're still, you know, good brands. But it'll kind of come down to preferences, right? And so that's the way I look at it with this blockchain stuff now. I think it's not going to be where there's necessarily one just clear-cut winner, right? You'll have different blockchains where some of it might just be preference, or it might be like, for example, oh, when it comes to cross-border payments, I'll use XRP. But when it comes down to me needing to do like, you know, something to do with a smart contract, I would use Hedera, for example, right? Like, so it's going to be coming down to like preferences and things like that. It's not going to be as clear-cut as the only option is XRP. You know, you HBAR can also do cross-border payments, but they do it with stablecoins. Swift is building their own layer 2. You know, Stripe have announced that they're building their own blockchain. So this is what I mean. Like, it's not going to be as clear cut as like there's just this one answer. It's just not going to be that. And so XRP isn't going to replace Swift, no, but it could be a viable alternative. And that's why, you know, when Brad Garlinghouse said about like it taking up to like 14% of Swift's volume, that's possible. You know, maybe that's ambitious, or maybe he's thinking way too small-minded. Maybe he could take 20%. I don't know in that regard. But yes, it could be a viable alternative. But in terms of them talking about like just replacing Swift, as if to say like Swift just completely goes away and then it's just XRP and Ripple, no, that's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Yes, there'll be alternatives, but it won't be a full-blown replacement. That's just not going to occur. But as I've said to you guys before, it doesn't have to replace Swift. Like, the only people who are probably going to be hurt by this are the people who believe in the $10,000 stuff, right? Because they believe there's going to be this flick of a switch and every bank is suddenly using XRP. That's not going to be the case. Clearly, evidently now. But for the people who don't necessarily believe in all that and just want a more realistic outlook, this is fine. This is fine. Like, even if it's not as positive as you want it to be, it still means that XRP can compete, and it still means that XRP can get some of Swift's market share. So that could still be huge for XRP. And remember, this is just one use case, right? Like, this is only one use case we're talking about. We're not getting into tokenization. We're not getting into DeFi. We're not getting into stablecoins, etc. Like, there's still many other use cases we could be, you know, looking at from, you know, XRP's utility. So to me, I'll be honest with you, while I don't look at XRP as the, you know, the Swift replacement, I still think it's the alternative. I still think it's a viable alternative. And I still think from that, it can still have a level of success. But, you know, in terms of completely taking Swift out, no, I just don't see that. So, you know, I thought I'd just cover this because it's still getting thrown about. And I think the news that's come out, I think that should kind of show you that Swift isn't going anywhere. Swift are just going to compete. Do you know what I mean? And at the end of the day, Swift are not going to go down without a fight. And Swift is a conglomerate of banks. Like it's a huge network of banks. So they're going to want to keep their stranglehold on the finance industry, right? That's why, you know, they've tried to put out a letter trying to stop Ripple from becoming a bank. They don't want crypto coming in and, you know, muscling in on some of their profits and what they've got going on. They don't like this. So they've got to accept that it's going to happen. Don't get me wrong, but they're trying to, you know, push back on it. But they're not just going to let this go and let Ripple come and take over. That was just never going to occur. So again, I hope this has helped because I see this still being thrown about, and it's kind of like, I just see it as like people using this kind of stuff still to try and get views. Like, you know, I still think it's like, okay, if we mention that it could replace Swift and stuff, this will get us a whole load of views and stuff. And it's like, come on, man. Like, we're at this point now where we've got enough information to be able to see that this isn't likely. You know, we've got enough information to see that this is not really going to be the likely occurrence of, you know, XRP taking over Swift. It's just not, you know, it's the alternative, but it's not the replacement. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, when we face reality and just look at it from a grounded perspective, this really isn't that bad. I actually don't think it's that bad at all, to be honest with you. And yeah, I don't think this has to be a real doom and gloom thing. I still think XRP has a bright future ahead. Thank you very much for watching this. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And hit that bell. Take care.